Hey folks, you're listening to the Idea Rotary. I'm Herman.
And I'm Jason.
Jason, when you code, what agent assistant do you use when you code? I think that's the new term.
You trying to check my stack. You want to see what I'm working with? Yeah, so I've been a bit of a slow adopter, I think. I've taken a very gradual approach into the AI assisted coding realm. I think mostly because when I was working at AWS, there was like an AI assisted coding feature that I tried out and it was not very good. But now I've just realized that it's just that version that's not good. I then delved into Cursor, and then I wasn't quite sure about how taking over having a different browser. I don't know if I kind of dug that. But actually more recently I've been using a lot more Cursor. I still haven't gotten the prompting right so that it doesn't fuck up everything else as I'm coding. But yeah, I've been using Cursor a lot more recently, and I've actually recently tried something called V-Naught, which is a product by Vercel.
I've seen it, yeah.
And it's pretty darn good. I'll admit, I was going in skeptical, but I've been recently doing a couple of mock-ups for a couple of MVPs and stuff, and it gets you, I'd say, 80% of the way to
And that
a
80%
mock-up.
is big.
That's big, and that's basically boilerplate, login. Okay, I tried it again recently, and now it's asking for all these credentials and stuff. So I'm kind of don't like that at the moment, because obviously they want to show you this nice thing and then grab you and pull you into the Vercel ecosystem. But yeah, and then I've always used Claude as my kind of sidekick. I'm not really a ChatGPT fan too much. But yeah, it's been really good, and I think it's really accelerating how I work, bar a few sort of nuances with how I get Cursor and stuff to work around problems.
If it's not obvious by now, it's that we're going to be doing, I believe, episode number 3 over the last 2 years on AI, since it's such a rapidly evolving field and is in everyone's faces all the time right now. So I think it's pertinent. I've been using Claude predominantly.
We talked about coding, but when you're just do you do writing on the side or any sort of
No, I only use
text?
it for coding.
You only use
Is
it for coding?
To be entirely honest, is that firstly, I'm a better writer than it currently,
Mm.
and maybe that'll change in the future. But right now, it just really tries to make things either incredibly academic or incredibly SEO goopy, since it's been trained on
Mm.
loads and loads of SEO goop, and so it's got SEO goop flavor.
Yeah.
Plus, I have no need for it to write for me. I don't want it to write for me. My writing is personal. I'm not writing, marketing copy or
Yeah.
documentation. Um, so I predominantly only use it for coding. However, I've become more and more just fed up with it. I mean, literally before before hopping on this recording, um, I uh, I just spent a couple of minutes with Claude just debugging some really basic CSS, and it would just make the stupidest mistakes. Like
Mm.
the import statement. I'm quite certain there needs to be a semicolon over there. Ah, you're correct. It needs to have an import over there. And I'm like, I'm quite certain that this part over here needs to have brackets. Ah, you're right. I'm like, am I feel like I'm just corralling a very a very confident intern, right?
Mm.
He's like, here's how you do all these things. And I'm like, I would prefer if you erred. And I think to the whole thing were to say to err is human is
Yeah.
turns out that remains true.
Well, I thought all interns were confident, so I don't think that's any different. But yeah, I can understand what you mean. I think sometimes I'm trying to get it to generate. Well, first of all, there's this thing now with Cursor being an AI sort of software tool. Um, One of the techniques is to create a specification of what you want to build first, and then you just give it to Cursor and it will take the specification and basically build out all of the different components in this sort of very automated way. So now I'm on Claude and I'm like, yeah, let's do some specking out and let's do this. But then it's like starting to like show me code and stuff. I'm like, no, no, no. I don't want code.
Bring it back in. Bring it back in. Don't write a React component, please.
Exactly. And sometimes even for like data analysis, it like draws out like a sort of React graph just to like kind of show the
Yeah.
graph, which I kind of get. But I think that the challenge for me is just like the coding with language is annoying. And I think this is maybe from a perspective of someone who's more introverted and more like, also a coder in the past. Like one of the benefits of being a coder is that you can kind of just tell the machine what to do, and you can tell it explicitly what to do, and it just does it. Obviously, barring like bugs and stuff, like maybe it doesn't do exactly what you want it to do, but this like whole like discussion that you have to have with the machine and like trying to like coerce it into like a specific kind of use case, and like I think maybe things like design to AI kind of converter tools might become quite popular, because I think there's still like, if you want to have something work in a specific way, like the best way to do it is just like write it in a specific fashion. But you've also got you've also got Bear blog, so you should be
Mm.
experiencing some of the more SEO side troubles,
Well,
right?
I do. I probably block and ban 30% of new users.
Yeah.
Since I have a manual review process that people have to opt into, and you can very quickly see who's writing with AI, and not because it's badly written, but because it's like out of context. You know, when someone has just started a blog and then they have a single post about the best places to eat in Istanbul, um, that's very obviously just backlink spam, click,
Yeah.
whatever. And it's written out in full markdown, and it always ends with, in conclusion, you can have a
Mm.
lot of fun in Istanbul, and it is a culinary blah blah blah. Um, and so that's been a bit of a challenge, but I think that's mostly under control.
How are you doing that though? What's the control mechanism? Because I like from the outside, I feel like it's kind of. I mean, you look at like Reddit and stuff, and people kind of assume that Reddit is mostly like people, but there was like obviously with O1, oh no, not O1 Operator, which is this sort of open AI feature where you can use a computer, and Claude also has computer use. And I was playing around with it, and essentially what you do is you like run this little program, and then the browser kind of desktop shows up, and then you've got like a prompt, and you like log into this website and post this here and do what, and then on the actual page you can see it like move and like click the button and like go to the navigation bar, and I think for each page it's basically taking a screenshot and figuring out what's going on inside of it. But I'm like so I took that and then I looked at the logs for like a website and what it was, and it just shows up as a normal Firefox browser. It doesn't show up as like any sort of specific AI tool. And what I can imagine is people are now going to look at, and I think someone from YC was creating something like this where they were like, yeah, you can do like sort of automatic outreach on Reddit, where you can go in and if someone mentions your product, you can kind of like subtly mention your product in a comparative way. And I think people on Reddit, like people were like just losing their shit because I think the
Yeah,
sort of
please don't
bastion
do
of
that. You're ruining
exactly
Reddit. Yeah.
the bastion of like hope of like people who are like into writing is kind of just diminishing really quickly.
So I think that we're going to see a lot more walled gardens, and that there's a thing called the dark forest internet theory, and the
Mm,
dark forest internet theory is essentially that like all things on the internet are going to be bots except for like little enclaves where there's like some or other form of human verification, right?
mm,
And so what happens with Bear is you want to sign up for a blog, you sign up. Now, this blog is, firstly, it goes and it does a whole bunch of automated checks to see if you're doing backlink spam or using specific
mm,
keywords. And then it puts you into what's called the frustration loop, where it just returns silly errors like our servers are barely holding on, or
mm,
please try restarting your computer. and um,
Mm.
and so it just wastes a bunch of time over there. But for people who do start blogs and do post stuff on them, it isn't indexed. It's got the no return, sorry, no index, no follow links,
Mm.
meta tag, and then it also isn't shown in the Bear discovery feed. And so when they want it to be shown over there, they have to explicitly opt in to have it shown. And so then that
Mm.
shows up on my review feed where I can take a look at it and I can either approve it or block it or ignore it. Um, and I think that again, the context is really important over there because if it's obviously a person's personal blog and they're just writing nice things, then that's awesome. But if it's anything related to promoting something, that's an immediate block.
Mm.
Um, and it's pretty easy to suss that out. Now, in the future, are people going to start personal blogs and just have, ChatGPT write it?
Mm.
Maybe, but there's no real incentive to do that.
Mm.
If there like there's no monetary incentive to do that. So they'd essentially just be wasting their time and effort. But this is also particular to the kind of
Mm.
platform that Bear is. If you're trying to moderate WordPress.com or Ghosts or whatever,
Yeah.
it's going to be a bit of a harder one. And the main barrier that might have to be in place over there is just make it paid. Is like if people want to pay you
Yeah.
$14 a month to put ChatGPT uh,
Yeah.
flavored
Swill.
text on there, like fine, pay me.
Yeah,
That's not going to happen
exactly.
on Bear, though. I just want to be explicit about that to anyone listening.
Putting the fat out there. Maybe to try like pivot it a little bit. So, like, have you seen any use cases where you think, like, holy shit, this is going to replace someone's job?
It depends. I think not yet. Maybe in the future. But it also depends on what you mean by like replacing humans. I think it'll replace portions of humans' jobs.
Mm.
Um, but I don't think it'll replace entire humans. So it might mean that, like, let's take, for instance, you have a sales department at a company,
Mm.
and and everyone does a mixture of activities. Um, will it replace anyone's entire job? No, I don't think so. Will it make each individual person more efficient at doing their jobs and you need an overall smaller team? Then yes. So in that way, it is reducing the number of people necessary to do a job, but is it replacing any specific person? No. And so I think the big one is people are afraid that programmers are going to lose their jobs to AI. And the assumption is that, you're just going to have an AI go and like generate a business for you. And that's obviously not the case.
Yeah.
But is each individual programmer potentially going to be more efficient and have a higher output of work? Like instead of spending a week writing tests, they just generate a bunch of tests, and
Mm.
that's a week of work saved. And in so doing, the number of actual programmers needed is
Mm.
reduced. Then yeah, I guess it is going to take some jobs.
Yeah. I think there's like a couple of factors to it because I think there's like a lot of sort of hype on the internet about like, oh, everyone's a coder now, like anyone can spin up their own software. And I don't think that's necessarily the case because there's a couple of, especially with SaaS, there was like this big movement of like, oh yeah, SaaS is dead. Like everyone's just gonna be able to spin up their own little like sort of shitty version of a program and just run it. I don't think that's necessarily the case because with software, I mean, having worked with lots of software companies in the past like couple of years, it's like there's not just the actual functionality. I think functionality, getting that working, yeah, you'll be able to get AI to do that. But there's other things that come with software, like the security aspects, right?
Mm.
The know-how that the team who's building it have, right? Because first of all, if I'm like, I think we take a point of view of someone who's got some sort of knowledge in the domain and they're trying
Hmm.
to string some stuff together and AI really helps with that. But if you're coming in as a fresh person, as like a lay person who's not done this, if you say like build me a way to manage my sales, it's going to recommend like a Salesforce like kind of product, which is basically like, why don't you just use that
Yeah.
SaaS? Why don't you just use like something that's existing? And at that point, it's almost like there's like teaching element to having someone who's like, yeah, let me just set this up for you and let's just get it all working. And even with being able to prompt your software into existence, I think it's still going to degrade back to someone wanting to get something done, and then you hire someone who's either got the prompts to prompt the system to get it to work, or like someone who can build the stuff and integrate it into your workflow. Because at the end of the day, like no one's going to say, oh, I need an accounting system, and it's just going to start generating this whole big accounting system.
Yeah.
Because first of all, you don't want to fuck up your accounts and like, get sued because you didn't like audit your business. And it's just going to be too complicated to run as well, right? Surely we're not going to centralize all the software into like these like two or three main players. And I think that's where it kind of breaks down, is like getting a software to just generate your code and just work away at it, and that's just your business now. I don't think that's the case. And the other factor is just with people, is that what I've seen in a couple of podcasts or heard is that like people are stringing together all of these different AI systems, and there's all these orchestration tools. And then you've got like Jim, who's like built all these tools in the background, and then they leave your company and you don't know what the fuck they've put together. Like you don't know how everything connects together, how everything things. And so there is also like a standardization element that allows you to say, oh, I just need someone who knows Kubernetes, or I need someone who knows how to do JavaScript. And then you can just swap them out. And I think that factor is kind of missed in this whole sort of hype about like software just being AI generated in the future.
Yeah, so I think that idea that software engineers are going to be replaced by AI is it tends to be made by people who have not worked as software engineers. I One of my friends actually did an experiment recently. So he's decided to teach himself to be an AI assisted coder. This is a person who doesn't program, and he decided to take this on himself and to build a product. Now, he already was starting from a very good place, is that he has run a tech business before. And so he understands the ins and outs. He's designed products that have actually made real world money. He's managed teams. He understands technology. So he decided to make a meal planning app, or a meal planning website, where you can create an account, you can generate a bunch of meals, and you can say what it is you want, and it'll, do it. And it'll look nice, and you can, yeah, create a meal plan, whatever. And so he started doing this, and it was very difficult because there is more that a coder does than just write code, is that they're interfacing with a whole bunch of different services, especially
Mm,
when it comes off of your local machine and needs to be hosted somewhere. Is that it turns out that deploying a Django application in this case is actually a very complex matter. Making sure that there's a database that's provisioned to it, because Django uses SQLite in development. So now
mm,
you want to get a Postgres database running in production, and then there would just be like some weird error that the LLMs would just spin themselves in circles around, around like serving
mm,
static images. No idea what's going on. You can fight those LLMs until you're blue in the face and not make any headway.
mm,
So it was a really interesting experiment, and he did in the end manage to do this, but it did take several months. And again, he is an intelligent person starting from a very good place. I myself run two tech businesses, and I regularly find myself in situations where I don't know what's going on. I use Google, I use Claude, I've tried DeepSeek R1 recently as well,
mm.
and they just talk themselves very confidently into circles, and I'm like, fuck this. And I go and I figure it out myself. So, so are these tools useful? Absolutely. I think that goes without saying. Are
Mm.
they going to replace coding, or are they going to replace an entire person? No. These are my opinions, but
Mm.
I may be corrected in a couple of years' time. Let's see.
Yeah. Did you do you think there's other domains, so outside of COVID coding, where AI is going to make a big impact, or is especially language models. I don't know. Like, I mean, I think the hype is around language models at the moment, but like I'm pretty sure like normal AI is like trad AI as they used to call it, like regression models and all that kind of stuff is probably still ticking away. But yeah,
Yeah.
are there any other domains where you think there's like going to be an explosion of innovation?
I would
Or
arguably say that that AI that are non-language AI are actually more important to the furthering of humanity, the progress of humanity, than these language models. And the reason is that these language models are they're useful at doing, let's call it aspects of knowledge work. But the the AIs that are doing the proper like furthering humanity are doing things like figuring out novel protein folding. You know, like what AlphaFold was doing back in the day. Well, a version of the transformer model, which is what these LLMs work on, has been used to explode the number of proteins that we now have a full knowledge of from a couple thousand to like 2 million, which means that we're kind of mapping the entire surface area of like what proteins can do. And so this
yeah,
will lead to, novel treatments. I think if anything, that model will be the reason that you can treat cancer when you're older, or,
mm,
that you'll live significantly longer because it's doing
mm,
some really heavy lifting in biology. Material sciences has also benefited greatly from these kinds of things, also finding novel materials and how they interact with other materials. It's like these are the actual big things that
mm,
are happening, but because it can't like speak to you like a human, it's not in the public zeitgeist because it's only really appreciated by, a bunch of material science nerds
yeah.
and not by everyone who has an iPhone with Apple Intelligence
Mm.
integrated.
Yeah, I think that's it's like there's more like everyone's looking at the general AI where it's gonna, I guess from a business point of view, it's gonna impact a lot more people because people will be able to interface with it a lot better, right? Whereas like with medicine models and like AI protein folding, like some sometimes even the scientists don't know how to like interface with that thing, right? So
Yeah.
it's like it can be rather challenging. The thing with materials though is like I've heard a few things and read some stuff, but I don't know if there's actually been that many materials that have been physically synthesized. They've obviously predicted these materials, but the process is a lot more sort of it's not yielding as much yet. But I
Mm.
think like having those kind of tools, yeah, as you say, mapping it out.
Yeah, it's like you're solving the knowledge problem first, and now you actually have to go and solve the engineering problem. It's kind of like how
Yeah,
nuclear fusion has been a solved mathematical and physics problem for, 80 years, but it's
yeah.
still an unsolved engineering problem.
Mm.
But the fact that we know that it is possible is what's really neat. So, what are your thoughts around open source versus closed source models?
Well, that's what I was going to ask about the medicine AIs, right? Like, are they being? I mean, I know AlphaFold is open source, and some of the other ones out there are open source. But I think for the research that you've looked into, is that being open source too, or is it relying on open source models, or what's the status for those ones?
I'm actually not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. I've been thinking more along the lines of the actual LLMs that people are using in their everyday writing emails and stuff. I know that
Mm,
Meta's released a couple of pretty powerful models, the Llama 3 one being the most
yeah.
recent. And then straight out of China, we've got DeepSeek R1, the heavyweight in the heavyweight corner.
Yeah. At first, when I looked at it, I was like, surely open source will win because when Llama wasn't meant to be open source. I think there was like a leaking of the weights. And so I think Meta
Yeah.
just kind of like doubled down on it and opened it. But then there's also like, there's a whole lot of like sort of witchery that's going a lot around like the licenses because, llama, you can't use llama the term, but there's also like a whole bunch of sort of like provisions in their license. This is what I've heard. I'm not a
Yeah.
lawyer. That like means that not in perpetuity will it be open source, but there will be a time when it's not
Mm.
open source. So there's like a lot of like sort of witchery. I think the DeepSeek one could also be like a game of like 3D chess, because if you wanted to, I mean, people are saying it's undermining the US, Nvidia, all that kind of
I
stuff.
mean, like, of course, the US is scared of that, but I think I think it's also important to specify that like it's not really open source in the full sense of open source. It's more like open weights in that
Yeah,
the actual knowledge used to train these models on is not available. And I mean, that's, huge, thousands, millions of
mm,
terabytes worth of data that needs to be ingested. And so you can you can try and train your own one, but you are unlikely to do it without a, botnet of scrapers.
yeah, yeah. Um, I think like I mean, it's impressive. I, I think the thing is, China benefits a lot from things that are open source, and I've heard a
Mm,
couple of people say this in that a lot of the technology, because of their sort of internal politics and how you sort of technology is transferred into China, they rely a lot on open source, and they sort of use open source as their way to kind of make progress, right? So
mm,
rather than inventing their own stuff, um, and I think in if they are able to force people like OpenAI to open source their models, we don't necessarily know the techniques that are being used at OpenAI and Anthropic and some of these internal labs. And by open sourcing it, it could also be like China just getting hold of it. And so in if this is like a sort of cold war of AI, like some people have said, then maybe open sourcing is not the best strategy unless you know for sure that you have like one or two iterations ahead that is going to
mm,
beat it up. Because the one podcast I listened to is like the challenge is that in democratic part of the world, like obviously open source, everyone benefits, but there's nothing stopping China from moving towards some of these more negative like incentives. So like they could just fund research into AI plus DJI drones plus, you know, battle tactics. And they could do that. Whereas in the Western world, people be like, hey, we should probably not do this. And we have like Darin Amodei and the guy in Anthropic saying like we should worry really about security and safety. And people are like, nah, we don't need that. But like the way that China can just funnel money to a specific cause, that's I guess the challenge, right? Because if they switch their whole economy to like
that's a
this
powerful tool that
thing,
they have.
yeah, exactly. And the other factor is obviously energy and the manufacturing capabilities that they have. Is that um, if if energy and electricity to run these GPUs is the limiting factor, then I think like the US and the UK has not built nuclear power stations for ages, and a lot of these countries are just like, you know, being caught with their pants down in a sense. And um, so I think in terms of the outlay of open source, I don't know if like these big labs are gonna start willy nilly open sourcing
I
their
don't think so
stuff.
either. There's also just
Yeah,
like there's too much potential money to be made for them to open source it.
yeah, there is. But then I think also the money thing seems to be dwindling, right? Because if China can open the will give out DeepSeek to the world and
Hmm.
show that they can make stuff at a cheaper rate, and everyone starts climbing onto it. And you can, I mean, you can like kind of self-host it to a certain extent, even because it's like so sort of efficient in the way that it does inference. Um, then maybe people won't even need to use OpenAI. Um,
Do you think that
and
we're kind of reaching the intelligence maxima for this kind of model?
Um, I yeah, I haven't done a lot of reading into that, but I've heard people saying that like it's there is a plateau, and I think when it comes to coming up with like novel things, it's not as good. So coming up with like a novel idea that because it works in a very general sense. It's like generalizing like what would be the next step in the sentence. So I don't know if it like will be able to, I think it will accelerate, like similar to the programmer mindset. It will be like a good assistant to a human, or someone who's trying to make progress on a topic. But I don't think, maybe not now, it might not
Mm,
necessarily, but I mean, obviously if you can get the compute costs down, then there's nothing stopping you from just running like millions of iterations like on your local machine, and doing whatever you want with it, right? So I think it's like, it becomes like, let's just take a random sample of starting points and let's just see how many of them actually sort of
mm.
collapse into a function.
Well, I think that that's an interesting thing. So, like, let's say, for instance, the more recent chain of thought systems,
Mm,
right, is that they're interesting in that they're kind of just optimizing around the edges by saying, let's just have it self-prompt a bunch
mm,
and then figure out what the best output is over there. And so the one-shot systems, so if you're not using a chain of thought, it could just be my perception, but I feel like they've gotten stupider over time. And
mm,
I know that that's probably not true. Like,
mm.
Anthropic doesn't want to release stupider models, neither
Yeah.
does OpenAI. So maybe I've just come to expect better things from it. But the fact of the matter is that I haven't seen a sharp improvement in the last 12 months, maybe
Mm,
even 18 months. Whereas if you think about the improvement of GPT-3 to GPT-4, right? That was
mm.
like
Yeah.
several orders of magnitude smarter if we had a smartitude index.
Yeah.
And so right now, in some ways, it is definitely smarter than the average person.
Yeah.
Um, and if you were to several orders of magnitude that higher, then you'd have God status. So it's like the
Yeah.
jump between 3 and 4 is like very big. But if we did that again, then I guess
Yeah.
that would constitute AGI, right?
Yeah. I guess maybe like part of maybe the appeal for businesses is that they want to hit these benchmarks, right? I mean,
Mm.
this is like a completely sort of potted kind of viewpoint. If they're trying to go for the benchmarks, maybe like, sure, like it can do Olympiad math, but how often are you doing Olympiad math at home, like while you're, like talking to your friends and want to know the answer to a simple question? It's like, yeah, maybe it's like breaking all these barriers and all these like sort of Turing tests and all that. But then like for the average Joe, it's just like, yeah, like why can't it figure out how many T's are in this like word?
Sorry, it just made that just made me think of something quite interesting. So with OpenAI and Anthropic, and I think this will probably also apply to Gemini, but I haven't tried it over there, is that you can get you can't get advice about things that they deem to be uncouth,
Mm,
right? So, um, if you ask it about how to, not pay the tax man as much money,
yeah.
through, you can say like legal and illegal means. Um, with Anthropic's products and with OpenAI's products, they're like, sorry, can't do any of that, and just kind of
Mm,
shuts that conversation down. Whereas with DeepSeek, they're like, oh yeah, yeah, so here's a couple of ways that you can do it legally, and here's a
yeah.
couple of ways that you could do it illegally, and it'll still put a little disclaimer like, don't do illegal things. Um,
Yeah.
but like that information is straight up there, and so uh, I think that uh, one of the things that we're going to see a bit more of is these open source models being used for nefarious deeds, not because
Mm,
they are the best models, but because they are the most available models to do bad
mm,
things.
mm. I think, yeah, like, I mean, there's going to be people using them for nefarious reasons any case. I think it's like the challenge is if like a state is trying to do that. And also I
They
think,
already
yeah,
are.
as the price goes down, like, like Linux is free. And so like most people use sort of Linux based tools to, do all sorts of like sort of dodgy and not so great things. Um, but I think like overall, hopefully, like we'll get, cancer cures and stuff before all of the negative stuff comes out. But yeah, it'll be definitely interesting to see like the Western world competing against China in this domain. We might actually get like a cheap GPU out of this. Like we can play
Yeah.
Crisis on full graphics for once.
Finally, 15 years later.
Because it'll be like a £10 Chinese graphics card. But yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see. But I'm not super worried about it taking my job necessarily. I am a little bit concerned because obviously there's a perception that AI can take your job, and so there's a chance someone who's a recruiter is going to be like, or like a hiring manager, they're like, do we need to get an extra person? And so, yeah, I think the best use case for people is just to try and be a bit more generalist, and plugging things together. You can leverage the power of AI to do incredible things.
And if you are currently just coming out of high school and are deciding where to go, go get a trade job. Go learn how to weld. It's fun. It's well paid.
Yeah.
People need welders. The AIs can't do it yet.
Yeah. Awesome. This has been great.